Naomi stood and waited for her friend Lillian, who was talking to the teacher. The girl looked at the school and said goodbye to the school with pleasure. She had finished the 11th grade. Naomi had already counted down each day for half a year when she would leave the walls of the educational institution. The girl smiled bitterly and thought that she used to love learning and went to school with pleasure, but everything had changed overnight. It was because the girl's father had been drinking hard liquor for as long as she could remember. And then, for educational purposes, Sam used to beat her and her older brother with a belt. When Naomi and Matthew were little, they hid behind their mother's skirt and all the beatings went to the woman. As they grew up, when they saw their father coming home in a drunken state, they tried to hide from him. This made Sam angry, and he took his anger out on his wife, Zendaya. The children saw this, but they could not help it, and only cried, hiding in a secluded place. They wished at that moment that some fairy tale hero would come and save their mother. Naomi and her brother grew up and often asked their mother why she tolerated their father's beatings. The woman smiled and replied that when they grew up, they would understand. Naomi could not understand her mother's answers, and one day she asked, "Yes, Mammy, but you are suffering physically. Why don't you divorce Daddy?" The girl asked. "Daughter, you see, but I love your father. And remember that there is a folk saying that if a husband beats his wife, it means he loves her." My mother said, "What a love that you have to cover your bruises with foundation." "I certainly wouldn't want that kind of relationship with my future husband," her daughter said passionately. "Mate, you have to grow up first, and then see when you get married," her mother taught her. Time was passing. Matthew was already going on his 18th year, and now a lad. When his father cracked his mother, he was already sticking up for her. Zendaya realized that her son was trying to shield her from her own husband. She often told Matthew to stay away from him when his father was raging. The son would reply that he could not bear to see his father behave inappropriately. And the woman was very much afraid that the day would come when Matthew would one day not be able to stand it and raise his hand against his father. And that day came. Sam came from the Kalem in a bad mood, and instead of a bottle of white wine, he was given a kilogram of dumplings and a couple of cans of billets. His wife was happy about it, as it was a great help for the family, because her husband did not work anywhere, and she worked as a postmistress and received a small salary. Zendaya only therefore said, enthusiastically, when her husband returned, "Now, what a pleasant surprise. It's been a long time since we've had dumplings, and now I'm going to make them, and we'll have a royal dinner." Zendaya cheered. "Why are you clamoring? You better give me money for a bottle," said my husband angrily. "I don't have any, darling. I have a couple of hundred in my purse for bread, and my salary is still 3 days away." The woman calmed down at once. "We can live without bread. Dumplings have dough, and this is the same bread," he said, and took his wife's bag, from which he pulled out a small purse. And then the man took out 200 and smiled contentedly. Zendaya saw this and rushed to her husband to stop him, but he pushed her away angrily. The woman tearfully asked to keep the money. The wife's request made the man angry. Sam hit his wife several times on the cheek with the palm of his hand. At that moment, his son, who had just come home from work, came into the room to hear the noise. Matthew immediately realized the whole situation and instantly jumped up to his father to stop him from hitting his mother again. But Sam had already pushed his wife hard, and the woman fell to the floor, her head hitting the wall. Zendaya moaned weakly, but Matthew was pouncing on his father. The head of the family, seeing that his son wanted to hit him, pushed the boy away, and then a fight broke out between them. Zendaya yelled for them to stop and got up off the floor to stop the scuffle. As soon as the woman approached them, her husband dodged and kicked her in the side. The spouse bent down and slowly settled to the floor. When Matthew saw his mother slump down, screaming in pain, he ran to the kitchen and grabbed a knife. The young man went back and in a fit of rage stabbed his father several times and only ran up to his mother when his father collapsed. Zendaya grabbed her son's hand and asked him to call an ambulance, and then the police arrived at the scene shortly afterwards. The woman was taken by ambulance to the hospital, but Sam was taken to the morgue as he died of his injuries. Matthew was taken to the station by law enforcement officials until the circumstances were clarified. Naomi found out about all this when she came home from a walk. The girl was informed by her neighbor, who had been invited as a witness. Naomi tried to get more information from her neighbor, but she said she didn't know all the details. The girl thanked the old woman and went home, and only then did she let the tears flow. She realized that at the moment she would not know anything concrete until she saw her mother. and she couldn't see her, because at that time the shuttle bus to the city was no longer running, and there was no money for a cab. The girl did not sleep a wink all night. She wondered what had happened, and as soon as morning came, she took the first flight to the city. After a while, Naili was already in her mother's room. Zendaya told her what had happened. The woman sobbed convulsively at times as she told her story, trying to hold back her sobs. When Zendaya told everything to her daughter, she started to get out of bed, saying that she would not stay in the hospital. Naili tried to confront her mom, saying she had already spoken to a doctor, and the doctor reported that the victim had a broken arm and a concussion. Mother looked at her sadly after her daughter's words and said in a whisper, "No, don't you understand? Your father is no longer alive, and your brother will be punished for what he did," she said. "But your escape won't change anything. You won't resurrect your father." Her daughter tried to reason with her. "You're right about that, but I have to see my husband off. He is my husband, and he deserves a proper burial," the woman cried. "Mom, I don't care about my father because he used to abuse you all the time, and we got a lot of abuse from him and my brother too. And now he's almost hurt you, and you're still thinking for him," she said indignantly. "Stop talking so badly about your father. No one gave you the right to do that," her mother said sharply, and then added a little softer, "When you love a man with all your heart, you will understand me. And I loved your father," my mother said with tears in her eyes. Zendaya was soon discharged from the hospital under a receipt, and the mother and daughter, before leaving for home, stopped by the station where Matthew was stationed. They learned there that the young man would not be released because he had been arrested for a crime he had committed and had confessed to. Zendaya asked the law enforcement officer not to judge her son because he had stood up for her. However, the man in uniform told the woman that he did not decide anything. There would be an investigation and then a trial. A short time later, Sam was buried. It was a great surprise to Naili that so many people had come to say goodbye to this man who couldn't live a day without drinking. The girl looked at the villagers in amazement as they said nice things about her father. Naili couldn't understand how these people could talk so flatteringly about this man who tinkered with his wife all the time. The day after the funeral, Natasha was visited by a friend who already knew everything that had happened. Lillian asked her mate how Zendaya was feeling. Naili grinned and sadly replied that her mother was mourning her beloved husband and that Matthew might get punished. Lillian took a seat next to her friend and spoke. "It's going to be hard for your mother to live here now. If she's still crying for Matthew," she said. "Hey, what the hell are you talking about? He's her son." Naili said indignantly. "No offense, but, I overheard my parents talking last night, and I better tell you about it so you're ready. So they blame your brother for everything, that he took your father's life on purpose. You see, your father was like a wand to the villagers. He had golden hands. He will cover the roof, and he can make a log cabin and dig a well, and he did it all for free. They would buy him a bubble and he was glad, but now he had no one to turn to for help, so he didn't have to pay big bucks. Our villagers just used hands and they don't care what happens to Matthew," she said openly. "But my brother was protecting my mother. It wasn't his fault," Naili replied angrily. "I told you why the villagers say that. You and I know what your father was really like, but to others, he was cheerful and always there to help for a small fee. I'm just telling you this so that you'll be ready when you hear something unseemly said about you," she explained. And in fact, a couple of days after Naili's father's funeral, the girl went to the store to buy bread. She passed a neighbor who lived a few houses down from them. Naili said a polite hello to the woman, but the woman gave her a scornful look and remained silent. The girl shrugged her perplexed shoulders and went on her way, as suddenly she heard from her neighbor, "Matthew's a bastard. You've ruined such a man. In a few months' time, there will be no one to dig the garden because Sam is no longer in this world and he was such a man. And it's all your brother's fault," the woman wailed. Naili turned around to face the woman and shouted fervently, "Yeah, what do you know? My father is a terrible man. He beat his wife, terrorized his children. And Matthew was protecting his own mother from a tyrant, and my brother didn't kill her on purpose. It just happened. She tried to get through to her neighbor. Yes, we all know this. A guy raised his hand on his spouse. But your mother continued to live with this man, which means she enjoyed it. And Matthew laid a hand on his own father. He had no right to do that. You're probably just like your brother," the woman said, angrily, spitting into the snow and walking away. Naili barely held back her tears to keep from crying in the street. She didn't go to the store, but ran home. She went home, and only then did she let the tears flow. Her mother came out of the room crying. Zendaya went to her daughter and sat down beside her and asked what was wrong. And the girl told everything in detail. The mother hugged her daughter and asked her to calm down, then said softly, "Be patient, my sunshine. You know that there are evil tongues in the village, so you've got a lady who can't wait to say mean things. Wait. Time will pass and the passions will calm down. You and I have to worry about Matthew now, because the investigation is going on. And the trial is coming soon," she said. "Now, he'll definitely get jail time. How will we live without him? I'm going to finish school and go to the city, and you'll be all alone," her daughter worried. "It's okay, don't worry about me." "Okay, I see that you didn't buy any bread." "Come on, I'll make pancakes quickly," said the woman. A trial was soon held. Matthew was given several years in prison. Nellie and her mother were numb when they heard the sentence. They had hoped the punishment would not be so severe. Zendia came to her senses after a few minutes and wailed. As Matthew was being led away from the courtroom, he shouted to Natalka to take care of her mother. She only nodded in response, for she could not speak, for she had a lump in her throat that she could not swallow. And now Nellie had finished school and stood waiting for her friend. During that time when Matthew had been locked up, she had repeatedly heard angry words that her brother was the last scoundrel and that he hadn't gotten enough jail time. Nellie tried to ignore such people, but still there was a residue on her soul after such words. Soon Lillian came up and cheerfully announced that she was free to go home. Nellie smiled at her friend and asked if she was ready to go to the city in the near future. Lillian winked mischievously and nodded happily. A short time later, Nellie was about to leave for the city to go to the institute. Before leaving, her mother sat her daughter down beside her and said that she wanted to talk to her. The girl willingly replied that she was listening attentively and looked at her mother. Zendia looked at her daughter and said with a sad smile, "How beautiful you've become. Your eyelashes are long, your lips are neat. I want to tell you, daughter, that city people are very different from our village people. And the guys there make sweet speeches that make girls lose their heads," she said. "Mom, if you're telling me to be discreet, I'll keep that in mind. Don't worry about that. But I want to tell you something too. If I can't get into an economic institute, I won't come here, but I'll stay in the city and get a job. I'll rent a room and live there, and next year I'll try again. Don't take offense, but I don't want to go back to the village, even though it's been 6 months since my father's death, and the evil tongue still can't calm down," said the daughter. "I understand you, and I don't blame you for your decision. Maybe you'll have a good life there, and I'll spend my life here. My husband is buried here. I'll wait for Matthew. It won't be easy for him when he's released. I hope that after so many years, everything will be forgotten." Zendaya sighed, and before long, Nellie was gone. She couldn't get in. She didn't get a few points. Nellie called her mother and told her everything. Zendaya sympathized with her daughter and told her to keep her head up and asked her to call Nellie more often and report everything. After this call, she called her friend, who had also gone to enroll, but in another city, and Nellie told Lillian about her failure and asked her how she was doing. Her friend cheerfully told her that she had entered a pedagogical institute and would soon start teaching. And then the girls agreed to keep in touch and tell each other everything. Nellie roomed with a girl who had also failed to get into the institute. They became friends right before the exams and got along well. The girl lived in the village next to Nellie's, and she didn't want to go back home either. Her name was Sneshana. Nellie immediately decided that it was necessary to find a job because she realized that her mother's salary would not be enough to support her. She also realized that she had to help her mother at the moment because Zendia was saving money to go to her son's house. Natasha was lucky to get a job right away. She was hired in a small store. The working day was from 8 in the morning until 8 in the evening. The work schedule was this 2 days of work and 2 days of rest. This suited her very well. However, having worked for the first month, Nellie was unpleasantly surprised as an audit was made and a shortage was revealed. The girl could not understand why this happened. Meanwhile, the store manager took the shortfall from the salaries of Nellie and her shift worker. When the girl received the money, she saw that a third of her salary had been deducted. Nellie was very upset about this, as she wanted to buy herself some boots for the fall that she had been looking at, and also send some to her mother. The girl decided that this month she would not buy a new piece of clothing, but would do it next month. Nellie decided that she wouldn't tell her mother about the shortage, so as not to upset her once again. Another month passed. They audited again and again found a shortage. When Nellie heard the amount, she couldn't stand it and cried. She couldn't understand why there were such large shortages because she and her replacement didn't take any money from the cash register. The girl's tears did not relieve the manager. The director again deducted from the salary almost half of the finances as repayment of the shortage. And then the girl announced her resignation. She did not want to work for free. Naili was thinking about where to go to work. She didn't want to go into trade. She was terribly afraid that she would have to work one more month and have to pay half of her salary again. So she decided to try herself as a waitress. Naili found this job almost in the center of the city in a cozy cafe. Everything suited her except for the fact that it was very far from the house where she rented a room. And soon the girl was running around the cafe from table to table in her uniform. And after a month, she received a quite tolerable salary. Naili immediately transferred the money to her mother. A couple more weeks went by. The girl came to work as usual. She changed into her uniform and went out into the hall, where the first visitor had already entered. It was a middle-aged man in a business suit. The girl approached him and politely asked him what he wanted to eat, then looked at the waitress interestedly and mouthed, "Tell the cook that Alex is here and he'll get me something," the man said. "Okay, whatever you say," the girl said, a little astonished. She'd been working here for over a month, and this was the first time she'd seen this visitor. Naili went in the kitchen and passed the man's request to the cook. The cook smiled and pronounced, "It's been a long time since Alex has been here. Come to the kitchen in about 10 minutes, and the order will be ready," said the cook. Soon Naili brought several dishes on a tray to her visitor and placed everything in front of the man. Just as she was about to step away, the stranger motioned for her to sit down beside him. The girl replied that the staff was not allowed to do that and would be fined for it. The man laughed and said that when he asked her to do it, the waitress would not be fined. Naili cautiously sat down. She was afraid that the cafe manager would come out and scold her for it. Meanwhile, Alex was asking the girl who she was, how long she'd been working here, what her name was. Naili answered and kept glancing at the front door, waiting for the director of the place to come in. Soon the visitor ate and asked for the bill. The girl voiced the amount, and the man took some bills out of his purse and put them on the table, saying that he didn't need change. After that, Alex got up and went to the exit. The girl looked after the man and only then at the money. She saw that the visitor had paid the bill in double. She felt embarrassed, and Naili wanted to give some of the money and ran to the exit. But it was too late. Alex got into the car and the car started. The girl wondered who this person was and decided to ask the cook. Naili approached the man in the white apron and asked the man embarrassedly, "Who is Alex?" she asked. "It's a friend of our boss. He owns an automobile repair shop. He used to come here to eat a lot, but now he doesn't come much," the cook said. Naili thanked the cook for the information and went into the hall as the visitors entered. The girl had been taking orders all day, and all the time she was thinking about her new acquaintance. When the working day was coming to an end, she was called to her by the head of the institution. She was frightened and went into the man's office and asked him what had happened, and looked at the waitress with a smile and said, "You were great today. I had a friend come over to eat and you served him. He was very complimentary about you. I have a feeling you've turned his head," said the manager. "Alex gave a lot of money for the order. I should pay him back," the girl said, embarrassed. She thought that her boss was calling her to scold her for sitting down to talk to a visitor during the working day. He's perfectly aware of how much money he left for the order, so you don't even have to worry about that. Just for the future, if Alex pays, don't take any money. It will be on the house. There will be another customer who will not be charged. You'll see him soon. He's my friend too. Iron warned. "Thanks for the heads up," Naili said. And at that moment, the door to the office opened and a smiling Alex walked in. Lynn got up from his chair and quickly walked over to his friend, whom he immediately hugged. Then the director of the place said with a smile, "I see that you had a good vacation at the sea. And the tan looks good on you," said the leader. The girl at that moment looked at her new acquaintance and was about to slip out unnoticed as Alex asked her softly to linger. Naili looked at her boss in confusion, and he nodded in agreement. Meanwhile, Alex turned to his friend. The workday was almost at an end. "Let me steal one of your waitresses a little earlier," the stranger said. I take it you're talking about Naili." "No question, but only if the girl wants it." Erline, "Believe that now we'll leave your office, and I'll be able to persuade this beauty to let me see her off." Alex smiled. "Mix. Well, try your luck," Ilon said with a laugh. Alex, after these words, offered Naili to leave the office, and as soon as they left, the man smiled amiably and asked permission to walk the girl home. She laughed, then mumbled, "I think you've made up your mind without me. And yet, if I refuse your offer, What will you do? Naili smiled enigmatically. Sob loudly, and you'll be ashamed that such a grown man was brought to crocodile tears, Alex replied. You know, I'm not sure you should see me off. We can just talk for a while outside the cafe, she said. You think I'm a boy to stand outside a cafe and talk to a beautiful woman? No, let me take you to a restaurant, and we'll sit there, he suggested. Thank you, but you really shouldn't do that. I'd rather you walk me home, but I warn you that I live far away, Naili said, embarrassed. No, don't worry about that. I'm on an iron horse, he smiled. Soon Naili was sitting in the car with Alex, who was talking about himself with a smile. He was 31 years old, living alone in a one-bedroom apartment with his mother, his father having died last year. Alex himself has been an individual entrepreneur for several years. He was married at one time, but life didn't work out and divorce followed, and he didn't have any children in the marriage. And then the man revealed that Erlan is his best friend, and there is another one named Vincent at the end of his narration. Alex added that he loves fine dining and going to the races. The girl, when she heard about the running, looked at her new acquaintance in amazement. The man, seeing the surprise on the girl's face, immediately asked what unusual thing he had said. Naili said, embarrassed, that she had never been to a horse race. Alex smiled and mumbles, well, then I know where we'll have our first date. I'll take you to the racetrack. I'll take you to the racetrack and we'll do something fun. We'll go this Sunday. It'll be tomorrow, the man said. Are we on a first-name basis yet? And Sunday is my work day, so it's not going to work, Naili replied. Let's go with the you thing. Or we'll be acting like we're in love now. And about the job, we'll settle that now. You must have forgotten that Ilan is my friend. And with these words, the man took out his cell phone and called his friend. Alex explained the situation and then asked to give the girl an unscheduled day off. In response, the friend laughed and said he was giving us good. After the call, Alex looked at Naili and spoke with a smile. Now you see how quickly all your problems are solved in my presence, he said. I see, she said, laughing, and then added, we're here. It's time to say goodbye. And it's time for you to go home too, she said. I would still like to talk to you, but I see that you are tired after the working day, and it would be selfish of me to keep you any longer. So let me kiss your dainty hand and you can run to your room, Alex said. The girl gave the man her hand, and he touched her palm gently with his lips. Naili felt the touch and shivers down her body. She had never known such close contact with a man before. Alex pressed his lips against the palm of her hand for a few moments, and then released the girl's hand. Naili immediately felt herself blushing, so she quickly opened the car door and jumped out of the car without even saying goodbye to her new acquaintance. When the girl came to the apartment, she went to the window. She hoped that the car would still be there, but it was gone. The girl sighed disappointedly and headed to the bathroom to take a shower. Standing under the running water, she remembered her conversation with Alex, and then his touch on her palm. And then her thoughts drifted to tomorrow's date at the racetrack. And then she felt as if she'd been electrocuted because they hadn't talked about what time she needed to leave the house, and they hadn't exchanged phone numbers. The girl bit her lower lip in frustration. She didn't know how she could remedy the situation now. The next morning, Naili got up in a disgusted mood. She realized that the date wouldn't take place because she wouldn't spend the whole day waiting for Alex in front of the entrance. She tried not to think about the fact that there would be no meeting, but her thoughts kept coming back to it, and she went to the window. The time was nearing 2 o'clock when the phone rang. Naili looked at the number, but it was unfamiliar to her. The girl answered and instantly recognized Alex's voice, which spoke in a friendly tone. You left so fast yesterday that I didn't even have time to get your phone number, he said. But you're calling me at the moment, she said happily. I had to get Erlan back on the phone. He, like a true leader, has the phone numbers of his staff. Okay, but we're running out of time here. Anyway, you have a little over an hour to get ready, and then as soon as I get there, I'll dial you and you'll be out, Alex was saying. All right, it's a deal. The girl disconnected the comms and laughed lightheartedly. She was happy at the moment. She liked this man very much, and she wanted to spend as much time with him as possible. She even thought that this man might be her other half in life. Soon the young people were at the racetrack. The girl watched the race and asked her companion many questions. The young man answered Naili with a smile. As soon as the race was over, the girl asked the man how often he goes running. Alex admitted that he goes in different ways and explained that it all depends on the circumstances. After the race course, young people went for a ride around the city. They talked about different topics in between. The girl at this time enjoyed the communication of the guy, and she wanted this day to not end, so she felt good at this moment. However, Alex drove Neely home closer to 9 p.m. and said he had to go because he would need to get up early for work tomorrow. The companion could hardly restrain herself from sighing with disappointment. The man kissed the girl's palm again, and she experienced the same state as yesterday. Neely came home and thought that now she would have 2 days off. She'd hoped to spend those days with Alex, but the man hadn't called her once. Neely was upset and thought that apparently her behavior didn't please the guy, and so it was a work day. She came to work, and her first visitor was Alex. Neely didn't know what to think when she saw him, but he called her over and asked only for a cup of coffee. The girl complied with the man's request and was about to leave when Alex said, "Have a seat. There's a bartender, and he'd be a good waiter." "I want you to know that you won't be working here anymore," he told her. What do you mean?" The woman asked in bewilderment. "You've been on my mind for days. I don't know how to declare my love, but I'm madly attracted to you. I'll be more brief. I suggest we start living together," he told her. "But we don't know each other at all." "No, it doesn't suit me," she answered. "What kind of people are you women? You want to get all your relationships through the marriage office." Alex said with a little irritation and immediately added, "But you are not a girl anymore, and you know very well that you need to get to know each other, not only in conversation, but also in bed, and only then to legalize the relationship." Alex said confidently. "That's where you're dead wrong. Maybe you've had a carload of girls and you're well read on these bed scenes. I can tell you that I'm innocent in this matter, and I don't want you to use me and then throw me away like an unwanted toy," she said and blushed. Alexa looked at the girl with amazement after these words. The man obviously did not expect such an answer. In the meantime, the girl stood up, her face red with anger, and was about to leave when she was grabbed by the hand by her interlocutor and asked to sit down. Neely grudgingly complied with the request and looked questioningly at the young man, who mumbled at the same time. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. It's just that now, at your age, all the girls are more than aware of such delicate matters," he said with a guilty look on his face. "Not everyone. I'm a walking individual for your information," she replied wryly. "You've mischaracterized yourself. You're a devout virgin, and that's very rare these days." "I'm amazed that such a beautiful girl hasn't had a real relationship with a guy. I understand your anger now." "Good, and for a week I'll be your boyfriend and we'll see how our relationship develops. And if we're still attracted to each other, I'll make you an official proposal and we'll get married," he concluded. "Did I say I was attracted to you?" She asked him. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. Admit that you're attracted to me. I felt it when I kissed your palm. You just don't need to be coy because it doesn't suit you. Answer me, honestly, what is it that draws you to me?" He asked with a smile. "Yes, but let's talk about something else," she said, angry with herself. "No, I agree. The other topic is your job. I don't want my girlfriend to work as a waitress, but I'm not exactly your girlfriend yet, and I need money, and you know it," Neely explained. "I'll give you the finances to pay for the room as well as the food. And don't forget that if everything goes well, we will soon become husband and wife. And I don't like it when my wife works. I want to be welcomed home by a beautiful woman in a good mood and not tired," he said. "Oh, let me at least work this week," she urged him. "Deal, and then not a day more," he agreed. A week flew by, Alex picking her up from the cafe when Neely was working and taking her home. The man called every day and invariably inquired how she spent her day off when he didn't come. And the girl happily informed him that she was studying a cookbook. A week later, the man made an official proposal to the girl, which she enthusiastically accepted. And after that, Neely, at the insistence of the chosen one, quit her job at her engagement. The girl initially informed her mother, who was unspeakably happy that her daughter met her favorite person. And after Neely called her friend and also told about her imminent marriage, Lillian heartily congratulated her friend and vowed to come to the wedding. Soon there was an introduction between Neely and her future mother-in-law, who lived in a 3-room apartment. Margot turned out to be a lovely woman who welcomed her at the first meeting. Neely was glad that she had a friendly relationship with her lover's mother from the first day. And then the girl got acquainted with a third friend of her chosen one. It was a young man of 27, whose name was Vincent. Alex's friend immediately appreciated the girl's beauty and told his friend that if he had known that Ilya had such a pretty waitress working for him, he would have gotten to this place much earlier than Alex. Natasha was pleased by Vincent's compliment, but her boyfriend scowled at her. When there were 2 weeks left before the wedding, the girl hinted that it was necessary to go to her mother's house so that Alex could get acquainted with his future mother-in-law. The man reluctantly accepted the proposal of the chosen one, but he realized that it was necessary to do it. And one day, the young people went to the village. When Alex found himself visiting Zendaya, he gave an imperceptibly squeamish wrinkle. Nayli happily introduced her fiancé to her mother and then began to help her mother set the table. In the meantime, Alex was looking around. When the table was set, the mistress of the house invited the dear guest. The future son-in-law sat down and looked at the dishes with food in front of him, and then quietly, and this is considered a holiday treat, fried potatoes with mushrooms, a slice of cheap boiled sausage, pickles from a jar, and a couple of salads that rational housewives usually prepare for the winter. He said dismissively. Natasha was embarrassed that her favorite person had made such a comment about the festive table. She looked at Alex and whispered that her mother couldn't afford to eat too much. This dialogue was clearly heard by the lady of the house, and so she said, "There's no need to whisper. I can hear everything. Alex, I realize that you are probably used to other exquisite dishes, but I keep things simple. I don't keep chickens, and I don't want to buy them at the store because they don't know what they're fed on. You could buy from neighbors, but they sell at too high a price. And there's one more thing. I think your fiancé told you that your brother is in jail. So I'm slowly saving my money because it's a long way to the north, and the tickets are so expensive. So you, my dear, don't be angry with me for such a careless table." The woman excused herself, but she was angry at her daughter's chosen one. "Mom, don't worry, it's okay. Alex is going to try your potatoes and he's going to love them. He just doesn't know how good you make them," Nayli exclaimed and looked at her boyfriend with a serious face. Lane realized that he had angered his companion, so he took a spoon and put some potatoes on it. And then Nayli handed him a fork and looked at him meaningfully. Alex took the fork and ate some potatoes, and after that smiled strangely and said, "I guess I was quick to denigrate the table. The potatoes are delicious. I'd be happy if my wife could make them as good," Alex said. After this sentence, Zendaya smiled and began to ask her future son-in-law questions about the wedding. Alex answered, occasionally glancing at his watch. The landlady noticed this and asked how long the couple had arrived. The guest politely replied that they would be on their way home in a couple of hours. Zendaya sighed sadly. The older woman had hoped that they would spend the night at her place, and she was also eager to have some privacy with her daughter, which she said aloud. Nayli, seeing that her lover was not eating, offered him to watch TV while she helped her mother clear the table. The girl, as soon as she was alone with her mother, immediately apologized for her fiancé's behavior, and the mother smiled in return and mouthed, "It's okay that your young man told the truth. It would have been much worse if he had done it behind his back. Alex has spoken his mind," Zendaya said. But still, he was wrong. The daughter looked guiltily at her mother. "And the tickets are so expensive. So you, my dear, don't be angry with me for such a careless table." The woman excused herself, but she was angry at her daughter's chosen one. "Mom, don't worry, it's okay. Alex is going to try your potatoes and he's going to love them. He just doesn't know how good you make them," Nayli exclaimed and looked at her boyfriend with a serious face. The man realized that he had angered his companion, so he took a spoon and put some potatoes on it. And then Nayli handed him a fork and looked at him meaningfully. Alex took the fork and ate some potatoes, and after that smiled strangely and said, "I guess I was quick to denigrate the table. The potatoes are delicious. I'd be happy if my wife could make them as good," Alex said. After this sentence, Zendaya smiled and began to ask her future son-in-law questions about the wedding. Alex answered, occasionally glancing at his watch. The landlady noticed this and asked how long the couple had arrived. The guest politely replied that they would be on their way home in a couple of hours. Zendaya sighed sadly. The older woman had hoped that they would spend the night at her place, and she was also eager to have some privacy with her daughter, which she said aloud. Nayli, seeing that her lover was not eating, offered him to watch TV while she helped her mother clear the table. The girl, as soon as she was alone with her mother, immediately apologized for her fiancé's behavior. Then the mother smiled in return and mouthed, "It's okay that your young man told the truth. It would have been much worse if he had done it behind his back. Alex has spoken his mind," Zendaya said. "Oh, but still, he was wrong." The daughter looked guiltily at her mother. "You better tell me, how long have you known him? How well do you know him?" my mother asked. About a month and a half of knowing him. I think I've known him all my life, my daughter replied with a smile. Why do you want to marry him after such a short period of time? Are you really pregnant? The old woman said in a frightened voice. Mom, we haven't had anything but a couple of kisses. I even live in a rented apartment. We agreed that everything will happen after the wedding. And we both want to live together. That's why we're in a hurry to get married. I'm only sorry that my brother will not be at the wedding, but he knows about everything and wished me happiness. May, since you and Alex are doing well, I'm happy for you, and with a pure heart I bless you. She hugged her daughter. Soon the young people left the village. On the way to the city, Naomi told the chosen one that he had behaved unkindly towards her mother. Alex furrowed his eyebrows and said with irritation that he hadn't expected to see such a shabby dwelling. The girl glared angrily at her interlocutor and asked him not to talk about her mother's house in that tone from now on, and looked at his lover and then laughed softly while mumbling, "You're so good in your anger I could kiss you right now." "Don't pout at me," he said. Her time flew by and the wedding day came. There were many people from the groom's side that the girl didn't know. On Naomi's side, there was only her mother, a friend, and the girl with whom she rented an apartment. Immediately after the wedding, Naomi went to live with her husband. The girl was eager to start settling in at the new place. She wanted their apartment to be cozy and comfortable. Naomi did not forget that her husband is very fussy about food, so she often looked at the cooking site to find an interesting dish and cook it to her husband for dinner. Sometimes she had questions about cooking, in which case she called Ivia's cook and consulted him. So the year flew by. The time was approaching when the girl wanted to enter the institute again. She told her husband about it the day before. Alex looked at his wife in surprise and asked why she needed to chew on the granite science, until he perplexedly uttered in response, "I must have some kind of education. What am I going to do for the rest of my life?" Said the girl. "Honey, stop your wild fantasy. Other girls dream of living and doing nothing, and you're talking about studying. You better always look the way you look. You know how nice it is for me to go out with you. I hear people say you got a diamond, and that's all they say about you. And Vincent is still pining for you. He can't get over the fact that he didn't meet you before me," Alex said. "Sometimes I feel like you didn't marry me, but my looks. But let's talk seriously about school. You don't think it would be pleasant for me to sit on your neck and not have money for extra expenses?" Naomi resented him. "You'll have a job soon. I have some ideas, but it's still in the works. I meant what I said about studying. It's all nonsense. You better study a cookbook. You'll need it very soon," he recommended. Naomi realized that she would have to forget about her studies. The young woman did not want to have a conflict with her husband about it, so she decided that she would stay at home for the time being and be a good wife and a good housewife. Another 6 months flew by. During this time, the girl's mother went to see her son in prison. Naomi's friend married a businessman. The friends still called each other often and told each other the news. Lillian often asked her friend when she was going to give birth to her first child. Natasha had to keep lying to her that it was not yet time for that, although in fact she dreamed of becoming a mother, but her husband was against it. He said that she had to get on her feet financially and then think about children. The man even forced his girlfriend to take birth control pills for the sake of it. Well, a few more months passed and Naomi was sitting at home watching a women's program. And then they showed a happy mother who had given birth to triplets. The young woman involuntarily wept with emotion, and at that moment her husband came home from work. He looked at her wife with surprise and asked what had happened. The young woman wiped her tears and mumbled, "We've been living together for 2 years now, and I want us to have a complete family, meaning us and our child." Naomi began to say, "But you're doing that again, aren't you? Do you need it? After all, you'll have a hard time yourself later with diapers, nighttime sleep deprivation, and all that kind of stuff." Alex listed, "I know all that, and I'm willing to go to all that trouble. It's just that you're at work all night, and I'm bored," she wailed. "And in your spare time, learn to knit. It's very good. You'll have a job, I promise you," he said. The girl realized that it was useless to talk to her husband about children. So she decided to get pregnant by trickery. A young woman stopped taking birth control. After a while, she realized that she was pregnant. To be sure, Naomi visited the women's clinic, where the doctor congratulated her on the soonest possible addition to her family. The young woman flew home, overflowing with happiness. Now she thought about how to tell her husband about it. Naomi waited for her husband from work and tried to think of every possible way to tell the news to her husband. And when Alex came home, she said in the hall, I'm pregnant. I went to the doctor today, the girl said. No, could this happen? Didn't you take the pills? The man wondered. Yes. I asked the doctor the same thing, but he told me that there are failures in the body and the pills do not give the proper effect, which is what happened to me. Me, wide wife. Then it is necessary to terminate the pregnancy, the husband said dryly. Not anymore. The time limit is not suitable for this. Don't worry, sweetie, we'll manage, the young woman said affectionately. Of course we'll manage. You're going to be blown like a cow and you won't be able to fit into any dress, the man said irritably. Time moved on. Nayli's pregnancy proceeded without complications, and soon the young woman gave birth to a baby girl who was named Amelie. Nayli was very happy about this event, for now she was not only a wife, but had become a mother. As the years passed, Amelie turned 3 years old. Nayli thought about sending her daughter to kindergarten. She wanted the child to have contact with her peers, and this is what the young woman told her husband. The husband was not against it, and agreed with the opinion of his wife. And as soon as Amelie went to kindergarten, Nayli talked to her chosen one about work. Alex didn't like such conversations, as he was fine with his wife sitting at home waiting for him after a day's work. However, this time the beloved was persistent in this matter and told her husband, like it or not, I'm going to look for a job. I have to beg you for money all the time, and I don't like it, she said. No, come on, you're never going to talk to me like that again. I've told you more than once that I'll get you a job. Be patient for another year. I've got some money saved up and I want to open a restaurant business. I've seen how Island's made a fortune in this business. He's already opened a restaurant. I'm still in the same place, he said. But you don't know anything about this business, her wife said, bewildered, and then added, it's better to invest in something you know how to do. In your case, it's an automobile repair shop, she advised. I'll understand in time, especially since Arlen, as a friend, promised to help. I didn't just tell you to learn the cookbook. You'll be an administrator in the restaurant we're going to open, he said. After this conversation with her husband, Nayli's spirits lifted. She told her mother and then her friend. She also told her mother-in-law, whom she often saw. Margot always welcomed her daughter-in-law and was happy when Nayli visited her with a granddaughter. And once again, when the daughter-in-law came to her mother-in-law's house, the landlady turned to the young woman. Your mom and I call each other a lot. And when we talk about you, she often calls you Nayli, but doesn't that offend you? My mother-in-law asked. Not at all. My mother calls me so fondly. It's very pleasant for me when she says it. Then I'll call you Nayli too. You're like a daughter to me. You come to see me more often with Amelie because I'm bored. And my son and his business are always busy. She sighed sadly. Okay, Mom. I'll try to get out more often. And I'll talk Alex into coming to visit more than once a month, Nayli said. A couple more years passed and Alex opened a restaurant. Nayli was as happy as a child because now she would not have to sit at home. However, her husband said that at first he would hire an experienced administrator and she would have to learn from him. Nayli did not argue with her husband, as she was not used to crossing her husband during the years of married life. It had been about a year. The restaurant was barely bringing in any income. Alex realized that if things went on like this, he would simply go bankrupt. The man began to come home in a bad mood. He understood perfectly well that it was necessary to change the concept of the restaurant business. The wife saw how the chosen one was freaking out about the restaurant and often told him to turn to a friend for help. Alex responded by saying, Island advises to give this place a major overhaul and completely change the menu to one that is easier to prepare. Let's say I agree with the menu. It's easy to do. But the renovation, it requires a fabulous amount of money. Where will I? You could take out a loan, though. Exactly, that's what I'll do, he explained to himself. After a while, Alex took out a large loan from the bank. The restaurant was closed for renovation, which lasted more than a month. New furniture and equipment was purchased. Nayli watched her husband's enthusiasm for the restaurant. The woman hoped that after all these innovations, the place would start generating income. And then the day came when the place opened. There were many announcements in the newspaper that there was a new restaurant in town with an excellent menu for every taste. Alex immediately invited his friends to celebrate the opening of the place. The man expected a lot of visitors that day and hoped, like his wife, that now the revenue would increase many times over. A week has passed since the restaurant opened. People's attendance was low. Alex was furious about it. He just didn't know what to do. The man was freaking out. and Naili didn't know how to help her husband. She had already gone to Elias secretly from her chosen one and asked him how to fix the situation, and the spouse responded. And I told Sasha from the beginning that this event was a failure. You see where the restaurant is located. The elite don't live there, and rich people won't go there on purpose. When Alex first wanted to open a restaurant there, I told him right away that it should be either a canteen or a diner. But you know your husband, if he sticks to his guns, you can't move him, my friend wailed. Maybe you could talk to him again. You should see how he's so angry. I can't look at him without crying, Naili explained. My words mean nothing to him. And you realize that too. My advice to you is to try to persuade him to sell the restaurant so that you can pay off the loan, said Erlan. Okay. Thanks for the advice, the girl replied. Naili had just mentioned the sale of the restaurant and immediately provoked a flurry of indignation from her husband. He yelled at her for the first time and rudely told her to mind her own business. The young woman, after an unfortunate conversation, took her daughter and almost crying went to her mother-in-law's house. When Naili came to Margot's house, she told her husband about the quarrel. The landlady asked her daughter-in-law to calm down and offered to spend the night with her. The daughter-in-law refused, as she knew that her husband would not approve of such an act and told her mother-in-law about it. Margot volunteered to call Sana and immediately dialed him. Alex, I'd like Naili and Amelie to stay at my place tonight, the woman said over the phone. What kind of freaky stuff is that? She is a married woman and should be with her husband. I'll come and fetch her myself, said the son threateningly. Me, son, I know you're having business problems. And you're taking all your anger out on Nataka right now, so let her stay with me for a day, Margot insisted. I'm on my way out. The man muffled and disconnected the phone. Alex was already at his mother's in 40 minutes. He went into the apartment and, without embarrassing his mother, threateningly told his wife that he would not allow her to take the quarrel out of the house. Haley said quietly that she had come to her mother-in-law's house to talk about her problems. Alex responded by saying, What goes on in our family should be between us, between you and me. You don't bring mothers into this. Do you understand? He said angrily. Yes, the young woman said fearfully. After this incident, Naili realized that she did not know her husband completely. She even, somewhere in her heart, became afraid of her husband. The woman dreamed that her life with her husband would return to its usual course when they enjoyed every day. After some more time, Alex returned from the restaurant in a gloomy mood. And then, as luck would have it, he had a loan to pay, but he had no money. The income from the car repair shop did not cover all the costs, and the revenue from the restaurant was absolutely minuscule. The man received frequent calls from the bank demanding repayment of his loan debt, and when another call followed, Alex answered, and when he hung up, he turned to his wife. It's decided we have to sell the restaurant before it's too late. I haven't been able to pay my staff their salaries for 2 months now. There's no point in continuing this business if it doesn't bring in income, he complained. I am very glad that you have come to this decision, replied the wife affectionately, who was actually delighted at her husband's words. Alex soon sold the restaurant. The proceeds from the sale were used to pay off a loan from the bank. As soon as it happened, Naili sighed calmly, because now her husband was no longer nervous about the fact that his business had failed. However, the young woman still secretly wanted to work from her husband, but she realized that her husband would suppress her desire at the root, and then Naili found a way out. The girl began to earn money on the internet. She performed simple tasks in social networks, earning a small income. 2 months had passed since the sale of the restaurant when Alex came home dejected. Naili asked her husband what had happened. The chosen one, trying to hide his irritation, answered that he had been to Aaliyah's house and that things were going well, and the wife was surprised at her lover's words and said, You should be happy that your friend is doing well in that regard. Don't you realize that I also want to ride a horse, not to pick up scraps from the table? Alex resented him. Are you jealous of Ilya? Suddenly asked Naili, who was surprised by this circumstance. That's a tough question. Maybe there's envy in the back of my mind. But we still need the extra income. It's time to move into a more luxurious apartment. We should buy a 2-bedroom apartment. Don't you realize that I also want to ride a horse, not to pick up scraps from the table? Alex resented. Are you jealous of Ilya? Suddenly asked Naili, who was surprised by this circumstance. That's a tough question. Maybe there's envy in the back of my mind, but we still need the extra income. It's time to move into a more luxurious apartment. We should buy a 2-bedroom apartment and sell this one. The only way out is to open another car repair shop, he said. But where will you get the money? Are you going to take out a loan again? My wife wondered. No. The man replied categorically and added, I have no desire to get involved with banks anymore. I'll think of something, he said. After that conversation, a month passed. And one morning, as her husband left for work and Eli turned on her laptop and was just about to take a social media assignment, the phone rang. The woman picked up the phone and heard the excited voice of a neighbor who lived across the street from her mother. She reported that Zendaya had been taken to the hospital with a heart attack. Nayeli gave a startled gasp and immediately started calling her husband. As soon as Alex answered, she quickly told him the sad news and asked him to take her to the hospital. His spouse asked with a little irritation. And how far are you going to go there? Husband said. Until mommy is better. I can go with Amelie or leave her with your mom. It's up to you, Nayeli. Only with my daughter I'll let her go to the village. Don't burden my mother with a child, Alex said dismissively. As you say, darling Hugh, the girl answered and smiled. She understood from her husband's words that Alex was still jealous of her, and that's why he didn't want to let her go alone. A short time later, Nayeli was already sitting beside her mother, who was lying in a hospital bed. The young woman stroked Zendaya's arm and said affectionately that everything would be all right. The sick woman looked at her daughter and told her not to worry. Nayeli nodded and thought that she should call her brother and inform him of her mother's illness. The young woman didn't even realize that Matthew's call would bring trouble. A few days passed. Nayeli was on her way home from the hospital to her mother's house. 2 police cars passed her. The girl wondered at the same moment what had happened in their village. If so many law enforcement officers had arrived. To her amazement, the cars stopped near her mother's house. Nayeli approached the uninvited guests and inquired, What happened? She asked. We need Zendaya, the uniformed man said glumly. She's in the hospital, and I'm her daughter, the girl said. Matthew escaped from prison and traumatized our employee in the process. We're looking for him. Was he here? Officer asked. No. He wanted to check on his mom, so he did that, the young woman said faintly and felt herself getting unwell. In the meantime, the interlocutor asked to open the house in order to inspect it, and at that moment, a signal sounded over the radio. The man answered, and after a few moments, he said that the operation to track down the fugitive criminal was over as Matthew had been caught. Nayeli then went into the house, where she wept desperately. She was well aware that her brother had escaped only to visit his mother. Matthew was afraid that his mom wouldn't wait for him to get out of jail. Nayeli also realized that now her brother would get more time for escape. She also knew that her mother must not be told because Zendaya, with her heart condition, might not be able to bear the news. Some time passed and then Nayeli's mother was discharged. Zendaya asked her daughter to stay with Amelie for a while longer. Nayeli could not refuse her mother's request, even though her husband called every day to ask when she would be home. It had been a few days since Zendaya had been discharged. Alex knew about it, and once again, when his spouse asked him to stay at his mother's house for one more day, he passed out and came to the village himself after a while. The man politely greeted his mother-in-law and ordered her to go home. Nayeli realized that her husband was angry with her for his long absence and that he missed her. Soon the family returned to the city, and life went on as usual. But after a month, when Nayeli returned from the village, she began to feel uncomfortable, her body itching all the time. This did not escape Alex, and he told his spouse. She'd been living in her mother's old hovel, so she must have gotten scabies. Go to the doctor tomorrow, he said. Nayeli didn't contradict her husband in return, as she actually felt disgusted. She went to an appointment where the doctor prescribed a bunch of tests, and soon after, the doctor told her that she had diabetes mellitus. I gave the doctor a stunned look and asked, "But we didn't have anyone in our family who had this disease." The young woman wondered, "You said yourself that you've been in a lot of trouble lately, so you got diabetes on a nervous basis. Now you should go to the hospital for a full examination," the doctor recommended. Nayeli returned home depressed. She didn't want to lie in a hospital bed. She informed her husband about her illness, who was not thrilled with the news. Alex immediately told his wife not to hesitate and to go to the hospital. Uttered sappered. The woman nodded in agreement and said, "All right, darling, but you'll have a hard time now because you'll have to take Amelie to and from kindergarten," she said. "Hey, don't worry about it. I'll figure something out," he replied. Soon Nayeli was admitted to the hospital. She was there for about 2 weeks. When she was discharged, the doctor gave her a prescription and explained how to take the medicine. And the doctor also advised the girl to worry as little as possible. Nayeli would have been happy to live without worrying, but then her daughter had an attack of appendicitis. The girl was urgently hospitalized. Nayeli was worried about her daughter's condition, and as soon as Amelie was discharged, she felt sick and went to the hospital again. It has been 7 months since Nayeli found out about her illness. During this time, she had put on a little weight because she was taking hormones. If some acquaintances told the woman that the extra kilograms only added charm to her statue, Alex caustically remarked that she was slowly turning into a cow. After these words, Nayeli cried, and her husband, to smooth out his harshness, "No tears. I'm just asking you not to gain any more weight and to watch your weight. Keep a notebook and weigh yourself every day. And now I want to tell you a happy thing that in a week, I will have a second car repair shop, and you and I will soon move into a 2-bedroom apartment. We've already found a buyer for this apartment," Alex said. "But where did you get the money?" The chosen one asked, stunned. "You should know the places, but in the meantime, start stowing things slowly," he smiled. And before long, Alex had already opened a second machine shop, and then the family moved into a 3-room apartment. Moving to a new place of residence was a big challenge for Nayeli. She was nervous about anything, that she would not make friends with the neighbors, that they would live too far away from her mother-in-law, that her daughter would have to go to the 1st grade, and she would not have time to get the child ready for school due to the move. And as a result, the woman ended up back in a hospital bed, and when her husband came to check on his spouse, she asked him, "Let your mom help you with Amelie. You don't have enough time for household chores with your business. Invite Margot to stay with us while I'm away," she said. "I'm not going to call my mother, especially since she's leaving. I'll handle this situation myself, and Amelie will be fine. Don't worry about her," he urged Nayeli. "Where is this going?" "She didn't say anything to me, really. I haven't called her in a while with this move." Nayeli didn't understand. "Please don't bother your mom at this time. When you're discharged, I'll take you to her myself." "It's a deal," he insisted. "I won't mind you, whatever you say, sweetie," she agreed meekly. Nayeli checked out after a while. She arrived home and noted with pleasure to herself that the apartment was in order. The woman turned to her husband and spoke affectionately, saying she was proud of him. Alex, in turn, handed his chosen one a notebook and told her to start writing down the calories and how many she had consumed during the day. Nayeli gave her husband a dumbfounded look and said he had lost his mind. Alex stepped aside and then gestured to the mirror and offered his wife to look in it. The woman complied with her husband's request and looked at her husband again, and then seeing that the life companion was perplexed, muttered, "You put on a few extra pounds that don't make you look good anymore. I don't have to explain this to you, obviously." He resented me. "I don't understand something. Do you love me, or do you only care about my figure?" Both. So let's stop this pointless dialogue," he decided. After these words, Nayeli locked herself in the bathroom and cried for a long time. She hated herself for being overweight and decided that she would take care of her figure without feeling sorry for herself. Only after these thoughts, the woman was able to calm herself down and left the bathroom. The next day, Nayeli got up early in the morning while her husband and daughter slept, then weighed herself, recording her weight in a notebook, and then she did her morning exercises. When she did her exercises, she mentally encouraged herself that she was doing it not only for the sake of the man she loved, but also for her health. Afterwards, Nayeli saw her husband off to work, took her daughter to school. She began to study the calorie chart. Legends, the woman decided that she would cook for herself separately and only from low-calorie foods. She made a menu and put it in a prominent place in the kitchen. Several days passed. Nayeli continued to exercise every morning and cook for herself separately from the household. The woman believed that everything would work out and she would be able to regain her former figure. And when a week passed, Nayeli stood on the scales and was horrified to notice that during this time she lost only 260 grams. She was upset by the result and decided to talk to her mother-in-law. That woman called Margot, but the caller was out of range. When her spouse came home from work, she told him that she had tried to call her mother but was unable to. Alex then looked absent-mindedly at his beloved and informed her in a calm voice that his mother had gone to live in another country, and looked dumbfounded at her husband and utters, "No, come. Why didn't she say goodbye? Why didn't you say anything to me?" She was indignant. "It's a long story. Be patient. Mom will get settled and she'll call you." It's just that she got a boyfriend and he suggested moving to his homeland, and she agreed. And Mom doesn't have to answer to us for her actions. She's an adult, Alex said, as if Alex had cut him off. It's not that Margot has to answer to us, the young woman exclaimed indignantly, wiping away tears with her hand. And then she went on to say, that's not the point. We got on well with her, and she left without a word to us. It's not nice to her relatives. That's what I'm talking about now, she said with sadness in her voice. I calmed down. I explained to you that she had a good reason for doing what she did. And let's just drop the subject. And actually, your husband came home from work hungry and he wants to eat like a wolf, said the husband. Nayli had no choice but to silently walk to the kitchen and set the table to feed her spouse. The woman was doing all this automatically, as her thoughts were preoccupied with her mother-in-law's behavior. She could not believe that Margaret had done such a thing. Nayli was offended that her mother-in-law had done that to her and Amelie. A month had passed since Nayli had been trying to lose weight. She decided to find out how much she would weigh at the end of the month. The woman stood on the scale and was confused. She saw that after all her efforts, she had lost only 1 kilogram. Nayli did not believe the result at first and quickly went to the nearest health clinic where she asked to be weighed. However, the nurse confirmed the result that Nayli had on the scale at home. The woman walked back in despair because she had exhausted herself so much, often malnourished, watching the family devour baked chicken or eat ice cream. Nayli tried to leave the kitchen at those moments so as not to tempt herself, and all this suffering was for the sake of 1 kilogram. She was about to give up on losing weight when the idea occurred to her that she should visit a nutritionist to find a diet that could be used with diabetes. And now Nayli has a new menu from the doctor. The woman starts diligently again, a new attempt to lose extra pounds. She strictly adheres to the menu and also exercises for 15 minutes in the morning. And exactly 1 month later, Nayli gets on the scale. The woman, seeing the result, runs to the kitchen and angrily tears off the menu sheet, as she has lost 720 grams of weight over this period of time. When her husband came in that day, her spouse complained to him that once again her month had been wasted, as she had lost very little weight. Alex grinned and arrogantly said she wasn't trying hard enough. Nayli felt her resentment rising and wanted to reply to her husband, but she immediately changed her mind, as she realized that the conversation could end in a scandal, and she did not want that. The next morning, Nayli saw her husband off to work as usual, took her daughter to school, and called a friend. She told her friend about her problem and that her relationship with her husband was deteriorating because of it. Lillian listened to her friend and advised her to run away from such a lover. Nayli, through her tears, replied to her interlocutor, "It's easy for you to say that, but then where am I supposed to go? Back to my mom's village. And look at the village men, all of whom are drinking themselves to death. Yes, it's not even that. It's that I love Alex," she said, crying to her friend. "You sound like your mom, who had to take a beating from her husband because of her love. What more advice can I give you? I don't know what to say in this situation. For me, I've seen pictures of you and Amelie, and you look pretty good. I don't deny that you've put on a little weight, but you've become more feminine." Lillian tried to encourage her friend. "Thank you for listening, and I'm sorry for putting my problems on you. Say hello to your family," Nayli said. "Don't get lost and call me in any case. Everything is possible in our life. So if there are any financial difficulties or anything else, call me right away," said her friend. Some time passed. Nayli stayed at home with her daughter and helped her with her lessons. Alex came home and told his wife that this weekend he would not come home alone, but with a rich client. The man asked his spouse to prepare a holiday meal while telling his wife that it was extremely important to him to convince his guests to come to his workshop. The chosen one did not ask unnecessary questions and promised her husband to set a luxurious table. It was Sunday, and Alex came home with a man who was dressed in an expensive suit. The head of the family invited the guest into the hall, where the table with numerous dishes was set. Alex looked at the treat and smiled. He was pleased that his wife had honored his request. Meanwhile, the guest also appreciated the dishes and said, "Your wife is a great cook." And after these words, the man looked at Nayli, who was standing modestly aside, and the guest clucked his tongue and said, "Your chosen one is good in every way," the man said. Alex clearly didn't like the client's last sentence and sternly asked his spouse to leave them alone for a while. And then the landlord brought a bottle of white wine and suggested that we start the conversation by drinking 100 grams. The guest smiled broadly and nodded in agreement. And Naili was in the nursery with Amelie at the time. She was unhappy that her husband had kicked her out of the room like a common servant. After a while, the woman heard her husband calling her in an inebriated voice. Naili hurried into the hall and saw that the guest and the chosen one were already quite drunk. Hence, the woman asked what her husband wanted her to do, and he in turn smiled skeptically and asked her to clear the table, while at it, "You can collect the leftovers and then take them to your mother in the village. She will be pleased with your gift of leftovers," he laughed. Naili did not answer her husband, as she realized that it would be useless at the moment. She decided that she would talk about it in the morning, and as soon as the next day came, the woman turned to her husband. "Well, what do you think you're doing?" "Okay, you insult me, but what about my mother?" She said. "And you are becoming like a village cow. That's why I say such words to you," replied the husband. "But then, why don't you divorce me if you hate me so much?" she asked. "You're a good cook, and don't forget, we have a daughter with you. If you want, I can take away your motherhood and go back to your village," he said wryly. "You haven't woken up yet. How can you not be ashamed?" She shouted with tears in her eyes and hurried to the other room so that she wouldn't see her chosen one. Only now she realized that her husband did not put her in anything, and here, for some reason, the woman remembered her mother-in-law. Naili didn't know what had made her think of Margot. 2 weeks passed quickly. During this time, Naili realized that the relationship between her and her husband had grown cold. The woman tried to keep the marriage intact. She even visited a witch doctor to help her get her husband's love back. Naili performed a mysterious ritual, which had no effect. Alex could still easily insult his wife. Leshwin was in despair. And one day, after her husband called her another name, she decided to tell her mother the truth about her life with her husband. Naili had kept everything from her mother until then, as she didn't want to worry her too much. She was afraid for Zendai's aching heart. Soon Naili was sitting at her mother's house and tearfully told her about her relationship with her husband. The old woman listened to her daughter in silence, and as soon as she finished speaking, she said, sadly, "If things are so bad with Alex, why don't you leave him?" She asked, "I still love him. I just think we need to wait a little longer and things will work out with him," her daughter said. "You see, that's how it works. At one time you asked me why I was living with your father when he did such a bad thing to me, and I told you that I loved him. And now you're telling me the same thing. Daughter, believe me, Alex will not change and you just have to bear with him since you love him so much," her mother explained to her. Some more time passed, and Naili realized that the former family relationship could not be restored, and she also learned that her husband had a mistress on the side. The woman realized that it was necessary to leave her spouse, and so she reported it one day. When Alex heard about it, he laughed and said that she could go to all 4 sides and forget about Amelie. Naili looked with horror at her husband and realized that this man was not joking and could make the words he had said come true. Naili decided to turn the conversation in another direction at the same moment. She asked the chosen one about his mother, and as soon as Alex heard the question, he involuntarily shuddered. The woman noticed this movement and was alarmed by her husband's reaction. In the meantime, the husband hurriedly replied that his mother would call soon. Alex's answer did not satisfy the wife, and she decided to go to her mother-in-law's old address. Soon Naili was standing on the landing where Margot used to live. She stood pondering, and then suddenly the door opened and her mother-in-law's neighbor came out. Finally turned to the pensioner at the same moment. "I came to visit Margot and they told me she had moved out," Naili said. "Wait, you're her daughter-in-law. Didn't your spouse tell you that he put his mother in a boarding house?" The neighbor wondered. "Alex told me that my mom and her Bio went to live abroad," Naili said, perplexed. "Nay, it's nonsense, really. Come to my place, and I'll tell you something," she suggested. The 2 women entered the apartment and walked into the hall. Naili sat down in one of the armchairs, and the pensioner sat on the sofa next to her. The landlady said that recently Margot had been suffering from blood pressure and had begun to give up a lot. The elderly woman was afraid to stay alone, and then Alex offered her mother to live in an expensive boarding house for a while. On second breed, and soon her son put her there. Naili, listening to her neighbor's story, was stunned to hear the news. He immediately asked the older woman, What about the apartment?" "There are strangers living there now," Naili said indignantly. "As Margot told me, her son would rent it to her while she was in boarding school. But as I found out later, the apartment was sold, not rented. That's all I know." So you tell me, where is Margot now? I guess you took her back to your place. The neighbor asked. Yes, Naila lied, and she wanted to be alone to think about it, so she added, I'm sorry, but I have to run. School is ending and I need to pick up my daughter. Thank you for the news, the woman replied. When she left her neighbor outside, Naila sat down on a bench and thought. She didn't understand why her mother-in-law, if she was in the boarding house, hadn't called her. It all seemed very strange to the woman, and she decided that she would get to the truth on her own. And soon Naila began to wait. About a month had passed and Alex's birthday party was coming up. Naila knew very well that her husband's friends and people he needed would come to the party. The woman bought groceries beforehand to prepare a festive dinner, and so the day came. The guests, headed by the birthday boy, were celebrating his birthday. The time flew by unnoticed, and now the end of the celebration was approaching. Alex swaggeringly called his wife to him and sarcastically said, humiliating her in front of his face, Betty, pick up the leftovers from the table. You'll spoil your village mother. The guests laughed, except Vincent, who still liked Naila. He turned to the landlord and noticed that his wife was in great shape. Alex was about to say something to his friend when Naila interrupted him, turning to Vincent. Thank you for standing up for me, but now I can fend for myself. The woman turned to her husband and smiled coldly, saying, You're right. I'll pick up these scraps and feed my mother and yours, which you refused. The woman said bravely, What the hell are you talking about? Alex said fiercely. Let me tell you and our guests what a respectable man you are in the community. I think you told your friends that your mother went abroad with her boyfriend. Only it didn't happen. You fooled everyone. And now it's time for everyone to know the truth. By the way, your mom should be here in half an hour to congratulate her diligent son, and I'll tell about you by then. Naila began to talk. Shut up or I won't be able to take care of myself, Alex said menacingly and started to get up from his chair, but he was immediately precipitated by Vincent, who uttered, Don't boil, Alex. You know very well that your mother was like a second mother to Eli and me, and it's important for us to know the truth. Let Naila talk, the man said. The woman glanced gratefully at Vincent, then turned to her husband. She saw that her husband was looking at her with fury. Naila was well aware that at the moment she had to tear off the mask of hypocrisy from her chosen one in public. However, she did not feel sorry for her spouse because she had suffered from his humiliation lately, so she began to speak with a smile. We all remember very well that Alex needed money to open a second auto repair shop. He didn't want to take a loan and he couldn't lend such a sum. That's when Alex turned to his mother and asked her to sell the 2-room apartment, promising her that he would buy a 1-room apartment instead. Margot refused her son, telling him that the apartment would be a future gift for her granddaughter's wedding. The son did not like his mother's answer, but he kept silent at the time. And then I went into the hospital, and at the same time Margot's health became bad, and she appealed to her son to have Alex take her in. However, Alex told his mother that he had an emergency at work, and he would not be able to properly provide care for his mother. And in return, he offered her to live in an expensive boarding house. The old woman believed her son, thinking at the time how caring her child had grown up. In the meantime, Alex slipped his mother papers, told a lot of fairy tales, and the elderly woman signed documents that her son could take over the real estate. That's how Alex took possession of Margot's apartment. And after that, he put his mother in a so-called boarding house. Naila paused. The guests sat in silence and waited for the continuation. The woman looked at her husband, who looked at her with contempt. Naila subconsciously waited for her husband to apologize and ask her not to say anything further. Seeing Alex's gaze, the woman finally realized that her husband was in no way ashamed, and she continued her story. When Alex pulled the scam, he told everyone that my mama had gone abroad. It seemed strange to me at the time, but I trusted my husband wholeheartedly, and for some time I waited for my mother-in-law to settle down in a new place. But as time went on, Margot never showed up, and I turned to my husband about it, and most amazingly, my husband was embarrassed by the question about my mother. That's when I felt something was wrong, and I went to the address where my mother-in-law lived, where I accidentally ran into a neighbor who told me about the boarding house. I was astonished by my husband's lies and did not tell him anything. I started looking for Margot on my own. I visited several boarding houses, but there was no woman in any way. I was in a stupor as I did not know how to find a mother-in-law. I started to revisit boarding houses, and in one of the institutions I was advised to look for a relative in a nursing home. That's where I found Margot. You should have seen how happy she was to see me. The old woman was crying tears. My mother-in-law told me about the documents, how she had signed them, and that her son did not visit her at all. I asked her why she had not come on her own. And at the same moment I realized that I had asked a stupid question because Margot could hardly move. Neil paused and looked at the guests. There was silence in the room. Everyone was shocked by the story. The woman was silent for a while, and then she looked at the people in the room and said, "But that's not all. I was waiting for someone to ask why Margot didn't call because she has a cell phone." Well, there's a little story here too. It turns out that Alex had thought of everything. He told his mother that he accidentally dropped her cell phone in the water and it no longer works. Alex promised his mom he'd buy a cell phone, but as you all know, he didn't. One more thing I'd like to say is that Alex put his mother in not the most decent nursing home. As much as I hate to say it, not all institutions have decent staff. It just so happened that Margot ended up in such a nursing home. Naile stopped talking and turned to her husband. She gave him a cold look, then smiled and began slowly clearing the rest of the food off the table. The guests watched the woman in a daze. Naile took her time with her actions, realizing at the moment that she had shocked everyone with her story. And when only the bread remained to be put away in the bag, the woman turned to her husband and said softly, "Here, my dear husband, I have collected the leftovers from the festive table, and it is this food that will go on the table of your mother and my village mother," she said. Vincent stood up at that moment, and he looked at his friend contemptuously and said, with a slight anger that he had not expected his friend to do such a thing. Alex remained silent in response. He had nothing to say to justify himself, and then took the floor and pronounced to the landlord, "What have you done, Alex? Margot is your own mother and you did this to her." Vince was right. "We didn't expect you to be so mean." The man wanted to continue talking, but Naile interrupted him. "Hold on, I'm sorry to interrupt you halfway through, but I just want to let you know. You and Alex are friends, but he was jealous of you, so he decided to open a restaurant. But his business failed. He couldn't get over the fact that you were doing so well as an entrepreneur. And then Alex decided that if the restaurant was not lucky, he would open an automobile repair shop. He did, but only in what way? Now it's clear to everyone what money Alex used to buy the machine shop. It is also clear that he used the money to buy a 3-room apartment," the woman explained. Then the doorbell rang. Naile exclaimed that the dearest guest had arrived and rushed to open the door. Soon Margot entered the hall, leaning on 2 canes, followed by her neighbor. Then Zendaya appeared, followed by Naile. Lagat approached her son, who at the same moment lowered his head. Alex didn't want to look at his mother, and the older woman put her hand on the man's head and stroked him quietly. Then she asked Vincent to help her sit down next to her son. The man hurriedly helped the woman to sit down. Then did Margot turn to her son. "Well, hello, son. I came to wish you a happy birthday. I'm sorry I didn't bring you a present, but I did. Thank you for what you've done. I won't blame you. There's no point. There's a popular wisdom that the law of the boomerang has never been repealed. Still, I didn't want that law to affect you. What more can I say to you? And I have nothing more to say to you. I only feel bad for you in front of your friends, your wife, and Alice. I must have missed something in your upbringing that you could treat your mother like that. And now, with your permission, I will turn to your wife, because it is thanks to her that I'm sitting in front of you now." Margot turned her head to Naile and smiled affectionately at her. Then the old woman beckoned her daughter-in-law to her with her finger. The daughter-in-law approached her mother-in-law and squatted down in front of her. Margot stroked the girl's head and said softly, "I've already thanked you for everything, but I want these people to know what you've done for me." My mother-in-law began to say, "You don't have to say thank you. I did it for your sake, because I love and respect you," Naile replied with tears in her eyes. "Don't cross an old lady, my dear. You are very clever." Here the woman paused and looked at the guests and then addressed the audience. "My sister-in-law found me in our big city. She went through more than one institution before she found me. But that is not the most important thing. Naile took me from the nursing home and took me to her mother in the village. And then she told us how her husband humiliated her in front of the guests. That's when we all decided together that we should give my son a present when he insults Nataka again. A couple of days before the holiday, she brought us to the city and brought us to my former neighbor, who had taken us in for the time being. We had to tell her the whole truth, because the lies would come out sooner or later anyway. The neighbor was shocked when she found out. She thought I was living with my son. Margot was silent. No one in the room wanted to say anything. This went on for about 15 minutes, and the silence was broken by Alex, who stood up and said, And why are you making a monster out of me? Do you know what it's like when your best friend gets richer every year? Or do you know what it's like when my wife disobeys me and has a child against my judgment? Do you even understand what it is like when your spouse gains pounds every day and does not look after herself at all? The birthday boy was indignant. Stop talking nonsense. Vincent interrupted Alex and immediately continued talking. You were not prevented from developing your business in your own direction. And as far as I know, Alan discouraged you from opening a restaurant. He warned you right away that it was not the right place. And about Emily, what I can't understand is that you're not happy that you have a beautiful daughter. And I'll say one more thing about your wife. She is an extraordinary woman, and you should be proud that you have such a wife, the man said. At that moment, Vincent was touched by Nayli's hand and asked him not to continue, but to let her speak. The man smiled at the woman and said that he was a gentleman and would always give way to a lady. Nayli thanked Vincent with a look and turned to her spouse. You and I are done with the leftovers. Now let's put one more fat point on my fatness. If you're annoyed by my figure, I can reassure you that you won't be seeing it from now on. You and I are getting a divorce, and don't even try to scare me about my daughter staying with you. After your words, I realized that Emily, really you do not need. You just did not want to pay child support after the divorce, and you do not care about the child. And I can also add that everything will be great in my life, and I will find a man who will love me as I am now. And at the same moment, the woman was interrupted by Vincent. He apologized to Nayli for that and said that there was already such a person who would love her. Nayli smiled. She knew her husband's friend had a soft spot for her since the day they met. In the meantime, Vincent continued to speak. You know, I have feelings for you. That's why I'm suggesting in front of everyone here that you get divorced as soon as possible and consider me for a new spouse. And believe me, I like your figure even better now than I did before. And I promise you'll never hear a hurtful word out of my mouth. I won't replace Amelia's father, but I promise to be a good friend. Now it's up to you, Vincent said. Nayli was embarrassed at these words and did not know what to say. Her mother came to her aid and told her that if she had fallen out of love with her husband, there was no point in keeping the family together. And then the older woman added that Vincent's offer should not be accepted at once, but should be considered. Nayli listened to her mother and nodded in agreement. She was just about to say something when Alex spoke. He bluntly said he would not grant a divorce under any circumstances. The man at the same moment, the chosen one, looked at him and said with astonishment, "Now, and so you hate me. Why would you want to fight a divorce? I can also tell you that I don't love you. It's all burned out. It happens. So you don't have to act like you don't know who you are right now," Nayli blurted out. "I've already told you there will be no divorce," the spouse replied stiffly. Vincent intervened in the conversation between husband and wife. The man turned to Alex. "You know, I really wish these were the days of the duel. I'd love to do it now. From now on, you know very well that our friendship is over. From now on, I won't even shake hands with you. I'll pass you by without noticing you. And as for the divorce, you can shake the air with empty words, but the divorce will take place because your wife wants it. And if you try to intimidate Nayli, believe me, she has an advocate who is willing to go to great lengths to make this woman happy in life. It's your own fault for what happened. Nayli loved you with all her heart, and you knew it, and the people around you knew it. But you mocked her and trampled on her love. So be a man now and just step aside and let Nayli get on with her life." Vincent spoke up and turned to the woman he loved, smiling encouragingly and asking her not to worry. Nayli smiled in return as well, and thanked the man again for his support. Vincent then turned to Margot. He said, "You shouldn't be ashamed of your son in front of us. Alex is no longer a child and should be responsible for his actions. And I also suggest that you, as well as Natasha's mother, live at my dacha. There is fresh air, heating, in general, all the conditions for paradise. And now I suggest that we all leave the owner of the apartment. Let him be alone with his thoughts. I think he has a lot to think about." Vincent suggested to Nayli that he gather the most necessary things. The woman looked at the man in surprise and asked where she was going to live. The man laughed and offered him his apartment. Nayli smiled and replied that she had not yet accepted his proposal of marriage, so there was no hurry. Vincent smiled and mouthed, "You'll think about it at my house. And you know very well that I will behave like a true gentleman. If you don't accept my offer, we'll find you a separate place to live," he said. Nayli looked at Vincent gratefully for the umpteenth time, and suddenly replied that she was willing to be the man's wife. Those present in the room cheered and applauded wildly, except for Alex, who stepped back to the window and turned away from everyone. Alex was approached by his mother and spoke softly. "It's your son's fault. Now my motherly advice to you, think about your behavior. It's never too late to change for the better. If you realize that, you know where to find me, either at Nayli's mother's or at Vincent's cottage. I wish you'd find the strength to realize what you've done with your life." "That's all I wanted to say to you, son," the woman said to him, turning around and walking with the others toward the exit.